started. All right, hi, I'm Dr. Dylann Gold. I'm a child clinical psychologist here at the NYU Child Study Center, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all about 8 ways to beat the back-to-school blues. And so you could submit questions at any time today by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel, and that's on the right side of your screen. We'll answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Okay? Okay, so 8 ways, right? We have about 20 minutes to get through 8 different ways. So we're going to kind of go quickly, but hopefully it will be jam-packed with good information to help with the school adjustment. Okay. Number 1, being proactive, right? It's always good to think ahead. What are the ways we want parents to be really proactive in helping prepare their kids for school? Well, we want to make ourselves aware of what the teacher and the school's expectations are, right? So some teachers and schools really want parents to be very engaged in the homework process and being really aware of what the assignments are. It might depend on the age of your child also. So it's going to be important to have an understanding at least of what those expectations are for yourself so that you can be as engaged as possible in your child's learning. Also, anticipating potential difficulties, right? So if you are aware that your child has difficulty or is struggling in a certain area, being able to be vigilant, looking out for issues, whether it be talking to teachers beforehand about, my child is struggling in reading or struggles with behavior in this way, has a little bit of difficulty paying attention in the classroom, has had an issue with another kid. So whether you decide to kind of put that forward or not, you want to make sure that you're actually making that choice mindfully. So thinking about what are the ways you can preempt difficult situations, right? And that kind of goes along with addressing concerns ahead of time, being involved to the capacity that's appropriate for your child, right? Also, down to the bare bones, making sure that your child has the supplies and items that he or she needs, right? It doesn't seem like a big deal, but going to school prepared, having what the other kids have, having your backpack neat, having, the appropriate clothes, right? An extra sweater, this or that. It's important to make sure that kids feel prepared and less stressed out at school. Also, considering after-school downtime, right? So often it's the case when school kicks into gear, you have this real new schedule, things are a lot busier all of a sudden, but ahead of time, you want to think about what's my child doing after school, right? If they get home at 3 p.m., there's only so much, there's a lot of time in the evening between when they get home and when they go to sleep. So whether that be planning for homework, whether that be extracurricular activities, but oftentimes when I talk with parents who are having difficulty, managing after school period, it's after there's been kind of a long time of there just being a lot of downtime after school, and some kids are going to require a little more structure than others. Other kids are going to be cool with some downtime, and that's okay too. It's just something to think about. Okay. The second major thing is setting expectations and rules ahead of time, which again kind of goes along with being proactive. Okay, so when we think about summer, it's this low demand time. Some kids are at camp. For the most part, kids aren't doing homework each night. They're not having the same high level of demands as they do during the school year and the same number of activities. So when they shift into the school phase, it then becomes all about organization, managing behavior, dealing with academics, and all of these other things that they have to juggle. So in order to help them to kind of get back into that mode, it's really helpful for parents and caregivers to structure the environment at home just as much as it is at school to help kids really adjust to that. Again, I often meet with parents who have difficulty managing kids' homework or helping kids to know when to do their homework or not to procrastinate or to do it right away, or the iPad comes out first. So just set expectations around what's expected in your home. So if that's no TV until homework is done, set that up front, right? Oftentimes parents get into a pattern of, it's been so hard to get him to do what he needs to be doing because he's on the iPad and he's on, the video games, or he's doing other things or playing with his friends, and it's hard to rein it in. And that's become the norm. That's become the pattern. So my thoughts are establish a different pattern from the get-go so that it becomes part of the routine. And it's normal and sometimes easier said than done because there's a lot of growing pains sometimes associated with a new routine that kids aren't a huge fan of. But over time, if you really kind of stick to your guns and hold to those rules, it can become more of the routine. Also, making sure that there's a clear path for your child to get help on their homework if it's needed, right? So another piece is, parents are working, they're really busy, kids are kind of around during the day, and maybe the instruction is to get their homework done, but, oh, I didn't know how to do this sheet, so I didn't do it, right? So thinking about ways, again, preempting possible concerns or difficulties ahead of time so that you can really arrange for that, and there's less stress around the schedule and all of that piece. Also, outside of the academic piece, making chores and responsibilities after school clear. So if the expectation is that your child take the garbage out or your teen take the garbage out, make sure that that's posted somewhere, that that's made really clear up front, even if we think that your child knows. Number 3, striving for predictability. This kind of gets, again, it sort of piggybacks off our last one, right? So the idea is that the more predictable life is, the less anxiety we have about what's coming next, the more able we are to build independence over time. And also just knowing what to expect makes each day easier, right? We're able to form habits. So oftentimes there's a morning routine, right? The getting ready for younger kids, that takes a lot more parent involvement. Although for adolescents too, sometimes it's really hard to get teens out of bed. So really planning for what are the steps in the morning. If it would be helpful to post a visual of, what needs to happen, that's, of course, an option. And also afternoon, kind of getting into the extracurricular piece as well, and also bedtime. When is bedtime expected? How much reading needs to happen before bed? So these are all things to really think about, and again, establish a daily routine and make sure it's predictable. Also, letting your child know ahead of time when the plans are changing, because that can often really throw things off. As you know, when you kick into gear in the school year, it can really be kind of a pattern of each day. You do something similar. Every Wednesdays I have karate and things like that. So to let your kid know, hey, someone different's going to be picking you up today, or this activity is canceled, or something's different, because that helps kids prepare for success a lot better. Okay. Number 4, emphasize sleep hygiene. Now, this is a really big one because, as many of you may know, we really need sleep to regulate our emotions, to be able to focus and pay attention during the day. And so a lot is required of our brain, and we really need sleep. So emphasizing sleep hygiene. What does that mean? So sleep hygiene is kind of a collection of things you can do that just help clean up your sleep a little bit. So that is something like making there be a consistent bedtime and wake-up time every day. And that also includes weekends, to help kids really get in the habit and the pattern of when to wake up, when to go to bed. Having the bed be used for sleeping only. A lot of the families I work with, kids are using iPads in bed, or doing other things like reading or activities or playing games in bed. And we would actually just encourage sleeping only so that kids can start to really pair their bed with it's time to go to sleep. Also, screens being off for 1 to 2 hours before bed. There's something called blue light that's emitted from screens that actually tricks our brains into thinking that the sun is out. So it can actually be a detriment to circadian rhythm to have screens out really late. So it's important to really be mindful of that. They actually make these special glasses you can wear to mitigate some of the blue light that come from those screens. But we would recommend in general trying to keep stimulation pretty low during that time. So we would recommend screens off for an hour or 2 before bed. Also limiting daytime naps, if any caffeinated beverages like sodas, and big meals close to bedtime. All of these things will help kids get into a routine for sleeping. Now, of course, some kids have more of a difficult time sleeping than others. Kids who are anxious might struggle a little bit, or kids with ADHD who are a little bit more wiggly might struggle a little bit. So those would be kind of separate things that you might want to consult your pediatrician or a therapist about. Okay, number 5, build in time for friends. So just as it's important that kids are socializing at school, right, in the context of academics, it's just as important that they're getting that socialization and that learning outside of the school setting. So make sure that there's time for friends, whether it be as part of extracurricular activities, play dates, right, making sure that they have an opportunity to really unwind with other kids their age. there's a lot of daily grind that's going on at school each day, and for them to have an opportunity to be with their friends in a low pressure situation is really necessary to kind of keep things happy, keep things flowing. So make sure you build in time for that and provide good opportunities, because this is their chance to develop friendship skills and to really build those relationships and to unwind. Number 6, encouraging physical activity. So this is another thing that's really important, because not only do we find, have we known for quite a while, that physical exercise can be really mood boosting, it can keep anxiety very much at bay, but there's also been recent studies that it can actually help with hyperactivity and impulsivity and things like that. So we know that it actually has a really positive impact on behavior as well as health. So things like team sports, more individual activities like karate and things like that can be actually really great and helpful to help kids socialize while they're exercising. Okay, now this is a really big one. Affirm, praise, and validate. Okay, what do we mean by that? It's really difficult to keep up with school demands. There's a lot on kids' plates that they're learning each day, either, maybe they're going from class to class. There's just a lot that we expect of kids these days, right? And it's important that we let our kids know that we recognize that what they're doing is hard work, right? Just as at the end of the day, when we come home from a long day of work, it would be nice to hear someone say like, wow, you work really hard, and to appreciate that or acknowledge that. And that's going to be important for your kids too. So letting them know, like, hey, I noticed that what you're doing is hard. I know that the demand to get up really early every day and go into school and do all the schoolwork and then come home and do your homework is really hard. So to acknowledge that for kids. And importantly, to show your appreciation for your kids' efforts, right? So letting them know, hey, I really appreciate that, you got up this morning without having any difficulties, or, I really liked it that you were cool when the play date with so-and-so had to end, right? So different things that kind of keep the day going. Let your kid know, hey, I really appreciate it, because it helps them to feel good about what they're doing, all their hard work and effort, and helps to keep things going in a way that helps to create more structure at home, right? Also, kind of more specifically, letting kids know, really specifically about what you like about either their academic, organizational, behavioral efforts. So things like, it's great that you got started on your homework right away, right? So, that's one example of about a trillion. So we could say good, great, nice job, but something very, very specific to let kids know this is exactly what I like. And what it does is it reinforces the behavior that it describes. And it, again, helps to keep things moving, helps to keep the machine going, right? And also highlighting the positive outcomes of your child's behavior. So letting them know, right, because you went to sleep right at your bedtime, waking up was so much easier. Or because you got your homework done right away, you had so much more time to hang out and watch TV. Because you took the garbage out right away, you got your chores done with, and you had more time for fun things. So really highlighting for them that sticking to this schedule and following that daily routine is actually to their benefit too. Because as kids start to learn and grow, they'll start to have their own agency and kind of want to be in charge of some of these things. But when you're much younger, it's a little bit more focused on like what's happening right now, what's the most fun right now. So to help reinforce this idea that if kids put in the thinking and the time and the effort now, that actually things might be easier later on is a helpful piece to reinforce for them. Okay, and our last piece, arguably the most important piece, is to play. So I would say I can name many, many families that I see that come in and talking about problems with getting homework done or problems with behavior in general, anxiety. And one of my questions that I always ask is, well, when you're not nagging about homework or, fighting over this, that, or the other thing, what exactly do you like to do with your child for fun? And most often, unfortunately, parents respond with, well, things are really busy. I don't know. We don't really have time to do anything else. And, we really don't get much time for enjoyment or play. And my response to that is typically, that's something that's important to build in just like anything else. because what can happen is things can get kind of negative. We can kind of get in this coercive cycle of do your homework, no, get ready for bed, no, right? It becomes a lot of stress throughout the day to kind of have to manage, and it's one demand after the next. And that can be kind of corrosive on relationships, right? If there's somebody who's telling you what to do all day long, it can start to get pretty wearing. And from a parent's perspective, you need your kids to get their homework done and to brush their teeth and to get in bed and all of that stuff. So there can be a lot of tension between what needs to happen and also what should be happening in order to kind of build some buy-in. So what we know from the research is that kids who have really kind of warm, loving relationship with their parents do really well and tend to be better listeners and tend to stick to schedules a little bit better. So actually setting aside the time, even if it feels like you're kind of wasting time or even if it feels not necessary, to play with your kids. And that goes for young kids, whether it be like building Legos or doing something interactive, to teens, whether that's like going out for a walk together or doing something positive, taking that time to play, not only for your child, but for yourself, can actually be really mood boosting and helpful. And also, if we think about kids who are on the skirts of summer, who have been used to playing all day, every day, and having a much more leisurely kind of schedule, it's helpful to be able to kind of continue that and to show kids like, yes, even though things are a little bit busier right now, we still make time for play and we still value that and feel like it's important. And that's going to be a really big piece in terms of kids' mental health. So those are our 8 ways. We went through pretty quickly, so we actually have a little bit extra time for questions. So let me see here. Some questions from you. Okay, so the first one, do you have any advice specific for children changing homes and schools? How can I prepare them for a new environment with new teachers and classmates? It's a really good question. A lot of unknowns associated with that, right? So I would say all of these things are going to be really important with an emphasis on being proactive and preparing kids and setting expectations up front, right? Because I'm sure it sounds like there's probably, some lack of clarity of what the expectations will be like, what things will be like from the parent's perspective as well. So if you're aware of those things, or if you do your best to kind of become proactive and know, all of those little pieces and the odds and ends of how the days are going to go, it's going to be really helpful for your child. So I would say making sure to be proactive is something really important. And also getting back to the piece of validating. So letting kids know, hey, it's totally okay that you're having trouble, or that it's hard for you, or that maybe you're feeling a little anxious, or it's totally normal to feel a little anxious coming into a new situation. So that's going to be another big piece, because there's something very normative about going to a new setting or a new situation and maybe struggling a little bit. And also sometimes kids are just really resilient and go with the flow, and reinforcing that as well. So kind of take it as it comes, but also be really prepared. It's this like sort of dichotomy of, know what you can know and predict what you can predict, and the things you can't, sort of roll with it and be ready to kind of problem solve and be right there. Okay. And let's see, the next question. How can I approach and prevent crying tantrums during morning drop-off at school for a preschooler with autism? That's a tough one. And this comes up a lot with preschoolers and young kids with or without autism. And so what I would say is, without knowing the specific child, that one thing that is a difficulty often for kids with autism is flexibility. So I think that it's going to be even more important here to create a set of routines and expectations around what it's like when mom, dad, babysitter, caregiver, drops you off and leaves. If there's ambiguity, if like some days you're staying longer than others, or some days you're soothing in a different way than other days, it kind of becomes really confusing for kids. So, often what we'll encourage parents is to kind of set the expectations clear, and, there's going to be some distress associated with that for the first bit. And I would say if it persists, then that would be something you'd want to talk to your therapist or psychologist about. But oftentimes if kids have a really clear expectation of this is what drop-off is going to look like, mom or dad is going to stay for X amount of minutes, or they're going to leave right away, they start to get used to that. Otherwise, it can become confusing and even more distressing. So again, kind of getting back to the autism piece, flexibility the difficulty with flexibility is going to be a key piece here to keep in mind. So any way that we are not also kind of exercising that flexibility muscle as well is going to be important. So keeping things as structured as possible, even though tantrums can be a really emotional situation and kind of hard to rein in. Okay. Do you have any advice on helping a child with high-functioning autism and anxiety who's already dreading the start of the school year? Yes. So, yeah, I can think of a lot of kids that I work with who have similar concerns, right? Particularly kids with anxiety who are anticipating all sorts of things, whether it be who's going to be in my class, will I have any friends in my class, I don't know this new teacher, will the work be too hard, will I be able to keep up, right? All of those things are normal questions that many kids and adults ask themselves when they're entering into a new situation or kind of diving back into a situation that's vaguely familiar. So what I would say is, again, really validate that, letting kids know that it's normal to feel that way, but also not indulging too much of it, because oftentimes kids are really looking for reassurance of like, tell me it's going to be okay, tell me it's going to be okay. And when it comes to that like more clinically significant anxiety, there isn't really any number of reassurances that are going to make your child feel more prepared. It's just going to be a matter of kind of doing it. So all you can do, again, is create as much predictability as you possibly can. Walk kids through of like, this kid is going to be in your class. They were in your class last year. The assistant teacher is someone you've waved to in the hallway, right? So you can provide them with information, but then at some point, it's just really validating, like, it's going to be hard. And as we get into the routine, it's going to get easier and easier, and I'm here to support you. So to offer that support as well is going to be really key. And also to really, again, kind of hold yourself back from the maybe urge to provide excessive reassurance, because that can actually sometimes make the anxiety worse over time. Okay. What tactics can be used to get my 6-year-old child to go to bed early? He will be in his room and unable to fall asleep for a long time. This is another big one. And so I would definitely refer to the sleep hygiene slide. That's a really big factor. Sometimes it's really about limiting screen access, winding down with some different activities as bedtime gets closer, really making sure that you adhere to a similar bedtime and things like that. Other kids are just going to have a little bit more of a difficult time falling asleep, and that's okay. So I would say, some soothing music, some, if maybe reading or, something gentle toward the end of the night that can be a little bit relaxing. There are, different meditation activities that you can do with your child that can also help. But I would say getting kids into a regular routine and a regular schedule can be helpful. What I also find is that kids tend to avoid bedtime, particularly when they have a hard time falling asleep. So things like one more book, refusing to brush teeth because it signals that it's going to be time to get in bed. So you want to kind of start to actually structure pre-getting in bed really well, so that, again, you have that predictability where kids know or they expect, like, okay, this is what's going to happen. These are the number of books that we read before we get into bed. This is how we do this first. We brush our teeth, and then this, and then this, and then we're done. Creating a predictable situation there is also helpful for kids who maybe tend to refuse out of anxiety about not being able to fall asleep. So I think setting that up for success is helpful. And then beyond that, if there are really some difficulties truly getting him to go to bed on a regular basis, I would say then at that point I would consult with either a pediatrician or a psychologist or a therapist and talk about what other ways you can problem solve that. Okay. This is another good question. How do you encourage a teenager not to procrastinate and start their homework before 10 p.m. on a Sunday night? I can definitely relate to this on a personal level. So yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because, we're talking a lot about younger kids, but teenagers certainly have their own agency at this point, right? There's less control that parents have over what they're doing. I would say, I guess it really depends on how old your child is. If they're 17, it might be a little bit different than if they're 13. You want to see what kinds of contingencies that maybe could be put in place. So for example, I have a family that has a no Wi-Fi before your work gets done policy. So that could be something, and not as sort of a punishment, but more as a way of like, first this, then this, and really enforcing that and making that really clear. And sometimes there's pushback initially, but kids often get really used to that kind of routine. So it's really kind of getting over the initial hump of resistance there. So I would say that's one big one, is kind of creating, you know, consistent contingencies, and also highlighting for kids like, wow, when you got started on time, then we had all this time to do this extra stuff at the end of the day. Also, planning fun activities for after homework getting done could be helpful as well. So kids have something to look forward to. They have kind of a deadline. If you're finding that your teen is having persistent trouble with getting things done, maybe they're turning in assignments late, maybe they're kind of constantly waiting up until the last minute, I imagine that at some point, for some people, that could ultimately affect grades. I would say it could be helpful to go to the school or the teacher and ask about different ways that you can kind of structure assignments differently. I've worked with families where teachers have been willing to provide kind of interim deadlines for things, so that kids can start to get in the habit of doing assignments and projects over longer periods of time. So that's another piece if the school is open to that. Do you have any other questions here? One moment. Great question. Are there any resources or tips I can provide my child to help organize? That is a great question. So it's really going to depend on the age of your child. So I would say if they're kind of like school age, getting a planner is going to be really important. But not only that, teaching your child how to use the planner, and where they're having them decide where they're going to put certain things in their, either in their calendar or in their list of assignments. So that's going to be a really big piece, is teaching them how to use it, or going through it with them to kind of decide, you know, what's going to make sense for them. We can actually probably provide viewers with some resources. I have a whole list of organizational resources that I can provide you guys. There are workbooks and things that really help kids to not only organize their tasks, but organize time, when they're going to do things, help with scheduling, help them manage materials as well. We often use strategies with kids where we're providing lists of things that they should have in their backpack. For kids who tend to lose things, that can be really helpful. So those are some other brief tips, but we can certainly be in touch with some other resources, kind of more global resources and references that you can refer to for organizational skills. Okay, this is a really good one, and it comes up all too often. How can I support my child in connecting with peers when struggling with bullying? That's a really good one. So oftentimes we'll have kids that come in and are, you know, feeling really demoralized, either because, you know, there's bullying going on at school and they don't quite feel safe, or because they themselves are being bullied. And that could be a pretty tricky and anxiety-provoking and sad kind of place to be for kids. And it makes the place that they go every day, like I said, not very safe. So what I would say is it's really going to be super important to be in communication with the child's school if there's bullying going on, and letting them know, letting other parents know if their child is bullying. So really being a voice for your child, and also encouraging your child to be a voice for themselves to whatever extent possible. I would say if there's kind of a more global difficulty connecting with peers as well, again, it's going to be really important to schedule play dates with kids that feel comfortable, kids that feel safe, right? Helping your child identify some kids in their class that they're either friendly with or feels like they have similar interests that they might be willing and wanting to foster a friendship with. So really doing that and setting aside time for your child to have positive experiences with peers, because so often I see kids come in who are kind of feeling globally rejected and feeling like they have no friends and that there's no way out. But if parents, particularly parents of younger kids, who can facilitate that a little bit better, and help kids feel like they can connect with someone to increase the positive feelings they're having with peers, that can be really a struggle and really tricky. So that's another really good one. And unfortunately, not one we have all the answers to at this point either. Okay, so if there are any additional questions or for additional resources, like I said, you can feel free to contact me here. My email address is provided. Okay. And so on behalf of the Child Study Center, thank you for joining me today. Once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey, and we would appreciate if you'd complete it. You'll also receive a follow-up email within a day or two with a link to a recording of today's presentation. And we hope you can join us for our next webinar with Keep Calm and Get Your Homework Done, also very appropriate for what we've talked about today with Alana Spira. And thanks again for joining me.